Dan in his van, episode 18, I'm going to talk about rhythm and the difficulties that people have when they're trying to delineate it or trying to write it out or trying to realise it in on a computer workstation, for example. Now, we've had computer screens now for 30 years or so, which have allowed us to input those rhythms as blocks on a grid. So you have your piano roll down one side or your drum sounds or whatever, and then you put your grids in and the step editor, and it's very useful. It's great. We all know where we are with that. But sometimes when you have a more complicated rhythm that's more like having off beats or 16th notes that are off the beat, very often it's necessary to hold on to where those beats are. Now, that is achieved to a certain extent on a computer screen because you have beats and you have the bars or measures, and then you have beats, and then you have the semiquavers or the 16th notes in between. But no provision is made for 8th notes unless you set it as your sort of scale on the computer, in which case you lose your 16ths. So I think, and I've taught a few people this way, and actually it's with quite a lot of success, I've used a ruler that measures in inches. Why inches? Well, centimetres are no use to man or beast in real life terms because it's all in tens. So in music, it's great if you're into 5/4, 10/8, but if you're into your 4/4 time, it's basically, it has to be an imperial measure. That is something that measures in things like 2s and 4s and 8s and 16s. If you divide 10, if you halve 10 4 times, you get to 0.875, I think, which is no use to anybody. Whereas if you halve 16 4 times, you get 1. That is of some use. At the bottom of your screen at the moment, you can see a ruler, which is in inches. Now you have the little fraction of 1/16th written on the left-hand side, and then the numbers 1 and 2, which are basically measures 1 and 2, or bars 1 and 2. The American system of measuring note lengths is very, very useful. It is completely clear and actually has huge amounts of sense attached to it. You have whole note, which lasts for your whole 4-beat bar. Now that's called common time, usually 4 beats in a bar. And then you have half note, which is a minim or half a bar, and then you have a quarter note, 8th note, 16th note. As a classically trained musician, I grew up with the terms semiquaver, quaver, crotchet, and really it's just names really at the end of the day. It doesn't really describe what's happening. So if we look at that inch ruler that you can see below, the scale has large lines where the bar numbers are. Halfway through the bar is an intermediate line, and then we get quarter of the way, which is a shorter lines, 8ths are shorter still, and then 16th is the bottom division, where you have the shortest lines. So that is basically a good measure of how to delineate a more complicated rhythm. You're thinking in all of these different things at once. A bar which goes 1, 2, then you've got quarters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and then 8ths, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 16, 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 2E and a... So you have the ands are the 8th notes, and the E and the A, 1E and a... The E and the A represent your 16ths. Lots of drummers work like this when they're trying to work out a rhythm. 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a 1E and a 2E and a 3E and a 4E and a... It's a little bit of a tongue twister after 3E and a... But it's fine. It gives you basically a handle on where those rhythms sit in the grand scheme of things. So going back to your ruler, you have the 16th notes, which are your semiquavers, 16 per bar, and you have 8th notes, which also double as your 16ths. So, for example, the second 8th note in the bar is the same as the third 16th. Or the first quarter note, second quarter note in the bar is your third 8th note, or indeed it's your fifth 16th note. That takes a bit of getting used to, but you can see it on the ruler, and it means that you can work stuff out. If you've got something innocuous like an inch ruler that is, an everyday object, it means you can sort of fathom out how a rhythm works. And it's getting more complicated, especially with the sort of the variations of drum programming that you can have. You have the ga dick dick ga 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 dick all of those offbeat sixteenths and those eighth notes as well dotted in there. It's necessary to have that sort of handle over the quarters first, and then to divide it into eighths. Don't worry too much about tapping sixteenths. You're better off tapping in eighths, and anything that falls on those eighths are going to be eighth notes, and anything that doesn't, it's going to be offbeat sixteenth. Get. One, get. So you can think of the cursor as moving along your ruler in 16th steps. And you'll be able to see how those more complicated rhythms work.